Does your dad, stepdad, or grandpa have a story that he's told over and over again since you were a little kid? My dad used to tell me about Mr. Squash You All Flat. And yes, you heard that correctly. It was a huge bear who would run around crushing little kids. To this day, I hate camping and I'm scared to death of the zoo. At the end of the story, however, Mr. Squash You All Flat learns about kindness and love. It was my dad's way of teaching me to care about other people. I'm pretty sure he could have taught that lesson through a story that wasn't so violent, but nonetheless, the message came through loud and clear. So loud and clear, in fact, that I can't wait to tell that story to my son and scare him as well. Nothing like wildlife terror to teach my kids kindness. Good thing we live in the city. The stories are like that though. They make learning a lesson a little bit easier. They stick with us, which is why we're starting a series that's all about stories that Jesus told when he walked on the earth. See, Jesus was an incredible storyteller, but these stories were called parables, which basically means a story that has a spiritual point or moral meaning behind it. Jesus used ideas and images that were familiar to people in order to teach them something about the heart of God. But why? Why would he do that? If Jesus wanted to be clear, couldn't he just make a list of things that people needed to know? But here's the deal. As we've learned from the stories we've been told since childhood, there is something that makes them stand out in our minds. And let's face it, they're more interesting to listen to than a bunch of commands. So for the next few weeks, we're going to look at some parables that came from the great storyteller Jesus himself and hopefully discover together some of the meaning behind them. And as we do, my goal is that we'll not just have a better idea of what matters to God, but we'll have a deeper understanding of his heart for the world around us and the role he wants us to play. To start, we're going to look at a story Jesus told that was recorded by Luke, who first gives us some insight and some context to the audience Jesus was talking to. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. In other words, bad people liked to be around the good teacher. In that culture, it was fairly obvious who the sinners were. It was also obvious who the good religious people were. And as you can imagine, they didn't love the idea of Jesus associating with such a rough crowd. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. It's easy to think that the religious people were a bunch of critical jerks. But isn't it true that things aren't much different today? Isn't things like that in your world as well? Sure, most of us think that it's great that Jesus loves sinners. But when it comes to us loving them, it's much tougher. Sometimes we can't help but look down on people who don't have it all together or who have a questionable reputation because of choices they've made. Sure, Jesus loves them. That doesn't mean we need to make room for them in our own lives. Maybe you're on the other side and see yourself as one of the sinners. And while it's great that people with bad reputations liked hanging with Jesus a couple thousand years ago, you don't exactly feel welcomed by the religious crowd today. Whether you're in with the religious crowd or you'd consider yourself a sinner, the problem is still the same. We feel like in order to be in with God, we have to behave a certain way. Whether you're in with the religious crowd or you'd consider yourself a sinner, the problem is the same. We feel like in order to be in with God, we have to behave a certain way. We feel like certain groups fit in with Jesus while others don't. It's a tension that spans through time, especially in the church. And maybe that's why the great storyteller Jesus himself told one of his most famous stories about it. Jesus starts by telling a short story of a shepherd who lost one of his sheep and went to look for it. He then tells a quick story of a woman who lost a coin and swept her entire house to find it. He finishes by telling the headline story, which is about a man and his two sons. It's like this. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate." So he divided the property between them. Basically, a son tells his father, "Dad, I know you're going to leave me some stuff when you die, but instead of waiting for that to happen, can you just go ahead and give me mine up front? Can you give me mine now?" And for some reason, the dad agrees. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. He's like the guy who wins the lottery but has zero money management skills. He goes crazy. He makes a bunch of poor decisions with his cash that leaves him with nothing to show for it. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. The son went from rich to so broke that he wanted to eat the food he was feeding pigs. When he lived with his family, he was all good. All of his needs were taken care of. But now he was taking care of the needs of pigs. Thankfully, though, the story doesn't end there. When he, the younger son, came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. The boy understood that his father's servants lived way better than he did. So he decided to go home and make a deal with his dad. Now, he doesn't expect to get his old status back or for all to be forgiven. He just wants a warm bed, a good meal, and he'll even work as his father's employee just to get it. Now, if you were in the audience when Jesus told this story, you probably had an idea of how this was going to go. The dad would give the son a long lecture, show him some mercy, and give him a job as a servant. And this would have been a good deal, because the son didn't even deserve that. But that's not what happened. Check this out. Jesus tells the story this way. But while he, the younger son, was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. As soon as his son came into view, the father wasted no time running right up to him. The son doesn't even have a chance to say anything yet. The dad, without hearing a word, hugs his son and kisses him. But the son had a speech prepared. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. This son expected to be treated like a servant, but the dad isn't interested in that at all. He had his son back. In throwing the party and giving him the ring and robe, the dad is basically saying, all is forgiven. We're good. I don't see your mistakes. I see you. Now let's enjoy the party. Now's a good time to remember the two groups of people who were listening to this story. For the sinners in the crowd, this message was unlike anything they had ever heard. No punishment for his mistakes, no awkwardness between the father and the son. This sounds amazing. But for the religious leaders, this didn't sound so great. Wouldn't this make the father look bad? Wouldn't this be encouraging more bad behavior from the son later? There should be some distance or some awkwardness between the father and the son. The son messed up and someone needed to pay. But Jesus isn't done with the story. He talks about the older brother who heard there was a party being thrown for his younger rebellious brother. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The father enjoys the party. The younger son enjoys the party. And the older son? We never find out what happens. Does he go to the party? Does he welcome his brother back? Or does he keep his distance? We don't really know. But would anyone really blame him if he took a pass and skipped the party? He did everything right. Why is the rebellious son getting all of the royal treatment from dad? But that's what makes this story one that people are unlikely to forget. Jesus is looking at his audience, the sinners and the religious leaders, and he knows that they both agree that the younger son should have to pay for his bad behavior, and the older son should be rewarded for his good behavior. Instead, they got something totally different. A younger brother who is found before he is fixed, and an older brother who doesn't like it. A younger brother who is placed in the family again, and an older brother who is so mad that he's ready to miss the entire party. In this parable, the great storyteller was making a point to the people who were unsure if they were qualified to follow him because of their mistakes. To them, the story is saying, you don't have to be fixed to be found. To the religious leaders who are frustrated and angry because Jesus seemed too soft on sin, the story says, careful, you don't get to decide how fixed someone has to be before they are found. The incredible thing about this story is that it's a message that still matters today. For people who think they've gone too far, messed up too much, and done too many bad things, Jesus says, I will never give up on you. And for the people who are making good decisions and doing things right, Jesus says, don't ever give up on someone else. No one loses their value just because they've lost their way. No matter where you are, what you've done, you are worth finding. And Jesus isn't waiting for you to get your act together to do it. The question today is, who are you in the story? If you consider yourself one of the good kids, I want you to think a moment about the people who you believe need to be fixed before they find a place here. Ask yourself, if Jesus doesn't think they need to be fixed to be found, why do you? Think of one or two really lost friends and start praying for them and hanging out with them in safe places. At your house, go out for coffee, playing ball at the rec center. Start intentionally being a great friend to a person who needs more Jesus in his or her life. And being a friend to them as they are now, you are representing the heart of Jesus. For others of you, you may feel like the younger son. You may feel like you've disqualified yourself from church and Jesus' love. And you figure that there's a whole lot of things you need to get right before Jesus will be good with you. But here's the good news. Jesus always has open arms for someone like you. You may have lost your way, but you haven't lost your value. Whatever your past, whatever your struggle, Jesus is ready for you. Take a step in his direction. Believe that what he says about you is true, that he isn't waiting for you to change in order to love and accept you. You're already found. Remember, you don't have to be fixed to be found. The son who came home was still a mess. You might still be a mess. Your friend may be a mess, but people can come home messy. The Father is the one who will receive you, redeem you, and restore you. You may lose your way, but you will never lose your value. You can go to God just as you are, and you can help others do the same thing.